And right now in Africa, they're not only giving people the digital tattoo for vaccines, they're now working with, and I quote the statements in the book, but they're working with a company called Trust Stamp and MasterCard so that your financial record will now be integrated with your digital ID and your vaccination record. And you can see where this is going, Sean. Right now, you can't go into a store to buy something without a mask in many places. Well, pretty soon, I think it's going to be you can't go into a store unless you've got a digital ID that proves you've been vaccinated. And that becomes so much like the mark of the beast that at this point in my book, I quote the book of Revelation on the mark of the beast. We're so close to it, you can't get much closer than that.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. What you're about to see is just a 12-minute clip from my full interview with James Perloff, which is featured exclusively at sgtreport.tv and on Patreon for my patrons. So if you like this content and you want to see 2 exclusives every single week, including my weekend wrap-up with Frank from Quite Frankly or Corey's Digs, you'll want to subscribe to sgtreport.tv or become a Patreon. By the way, if YouTube ever terminates my 2 YouTube channels, my content will only be found at sgtreport.tv and Patreon, because we're all fed up with YouTube's fascist tactics. And without further ado, here's the first 12 minutes of my interview with James Perloff. Guys, I have back on the line right now my longtime friend, author James Perloff, and the reason that I couldn't put this video on YouTube even if I wanted to is because of the topic. Red Pilled, that's the new book from Mr. Perloff. How are you, James?
I'm doing very good, Sean, and you and I actually did a little talk about you on YouTube right after I released this book, but we didn't actually mention the word COVID or anything. We kept the bots away.
That's right. Did you sell a few copies?
Oh, we sold a ton of copies. In fact, 2 days after the book's release, which I think is the day after you posted the video, the book sales rank on Amazon was 254 of all books on Amazon, which is actually the best sales rank I've ever had a book do. And that has translated into a lot of sales, and it's much appreciated. I'll be continuing to promote the book on your platform and other platforms over the coming weeks.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. The audience knows they're one of the most gracious and supportive audiences out there. You've said it many times. Guys, this couldn't be a more timely tweet. If you want this sick, evil tyranny in the USA, vote Democrat in November. D's, like Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, have openly pledged their allegiance to a new world order and global governance. Hashtag COVID, Rockefeller, lockstep. This is what's going on in Australia right now, friends. Australian police arrest woman for anti-COVID lockdown Facebook post and seize all of her computers.
Yeah, you can show me your search warrant before you go through my house.
You're the occupier or
Yeah, I own this house.
There it is. That's a search warrant.
Search warrant for what?
Now, what I will explain to you is if you want to listen, you've got your phone going.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Right. Now, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
Incitement?
Yeah. Now, you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given evidence.
Excuse me, incitement for what? What on earth?
Yeah.
Excuse me, what on earth?
So just put your phone down.
Can you, like,
relation
record
to-
this? I'm in my pyjamas.
What's
I have
this?
an ultrasound in an hour. because
Yeah,
I'm
she's
pregnant.
pregnant, so
I'll take it easy.
What's
In
this
relation
about?
to
I
a
have an
face-
ultrasound
Just let me
in an
finish.
hour.
Let me finish and I'll explain. It's in relation to a Facebook post in relation to a lockdown protest you put on for Saturday.
Yeah, and I wasn't breaking any laws by doing
You
that.
are actually.
You are. She's breaking the laws, James, by posting anti-COVID stuff on Facebook. God forbid people show up for a lockdown protest in Australia. Does this sound like a free people to you, James?
Yeah, this scene, I'd seen it before on Twitter, and it's something like out of a dystopian Orwellian movie rather than real life, but it's actually happening.
All right. Well, I think it's a good segue to the book. Part 1, the lockdown. Part 2, the methodology of panic. Part 3, theories about the nature of COVID-19. And Part 4, the deep state's endgame. Take us through it, James.
Yeah, I actually started this as a blog post called COVID-19 Red Pill back in April. And what happened, Sean, is more and more information developed and more incidents took place, like the one you were just showing. I would update the post, and then some people said, well, I've read your original long blog post, but how do we know what the updates are? So I would put the updates in italics with a date, but the posts kept getting longer, and I think this business of having some paragraphs italicized and some not was confusing to new readers. And actually, the book has turned out to be just a little over 200 pages long, and I think that's too long for an online post. Plus, you never know when your digital content's going to get taken down. It's kind of nice to have it preserved in hard copy. So I decided the best thing to do was to get a book out there in hard copy that you could share with people. And what's going to stress with this book, Sean, one thing is that it's broken into 27 chapters that deal with just about every aspect of COVID. In fact, why don't I go over those chapters real quick? It doesn't take long. The part one is about the lockdown. So I talked about the economic and health impact and the destruction of civil liberties. And then experts speaking out, medical experts, on why the lockdown was not necessary. And then a chapter on masks and social distancing, again, with experts speaking out and what the studies show. And I wanted to start with the lockdown because that's the least disputable or debatable or theoretical of any part of this whole COVID problem that we're dealing with. Part two is called The Methodology of Panic. And the chapters there, I went on putting COVID in perspective, like showing how we've had worse pandemics with no lockdowns, no masks, no social distancing. And then I talk about how they use fake news in the mainstream media. They accuse alt media of using fake news, but the mainstream media has been caught red-handed using fake news. And so I give examples of that. Also, I have a series of chapters on how they've inflated the COVID deaths. One is on the original modeling as from Imperial College and Neil Ferguson, how they exaggerated the deaths. The second one is on how they conflate it with other deaths. The next chapter is on how they have monkeyed with death certificates. And then I talk about the nursing home controversy, which is real deaths, but which were unnecessary deaths. And then finally, a chapter on testing. And part three is theories about the nature of COVID-19. As you know, the alt media has discovered different possibilities. So I start with the main chapter on the mainstreaming explanation, then one on the bioweapon theory, then one on if it was a bioweapon, was it deliberately released or was it just an accidental release? I don't think it's accidental when you look at Event 201 and all the things that were predicting it. They have a chapter on the 5G theory, and then we have another chapter that summarizes other theories such as Andrew Kaufman's. And then part four, the deep state's endgame, we have chapters on population reduction, one devoted all to Bill Gates himself, one on their global vaccine, which they've envisioned, one called 8 Reasons Why We Don't Need a COVID Vaccine, and then one just on hydroxychloroquine. So much has come out about that now. And then their goal of a global digital ID, a chapter on the cashless society, and a chapter on contact tracing. And then the last chapters lay out some possible future scenarios. I don't want to be in any way rigid about even try to predict the future, but there's some probabilities we can discuss. And 27 is called, the last chapter is called Hope and Encouragement. And by the way, the book is also indexed so that if you want to find information, you've got to remember there's a quote in the book from Robert F. Kennedy. You can just look him up. You can find that quote very fast. I wanted to make this book as utilitarian, as useful as possible.
Well, it's important because it's the history here. We're living through the history in real time. If we are to overcome this tyranny, which we will, I believe President Donald Trump will be reelected in November, and we have another 4 years to cleanse the deep state. That's my hope anyway. But let's focus on page 9, destruction of civil liberties. It's not lost on you that it's the Democrat mayors and governors that are doing the most civil liberties destruction. You'll notice that Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, never locked anything down. And the state is flourishing economically. They don't have a COVID pandemic. It's all nonsense. Look what's going on in New Zealand. If you test positive, they want to take you away from your family and put you in a quarantine camp. And then look what's going on in Australia. It seems to me that this is just explicitly a global governance litmus test to see what they can get away with. And it really depends on who's in charge as to what they can get away with.
Right. In fact, Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of Britain, has even explicitly called for global governance in order to handle the pandemic. So you can see where they're bringing us. But yes, as far as civil liberties go, that video you showed from Australia is a terrific example. But we've seen it here in America. I cite examples in that chapter on civil liberties. For example, the woman in Brooklyn who was wearing a mask, but not properly. So she was surrounded by police, thrown on the ground and handcuffed in front of her small child. The child was only 2, for not wearing a mask properly. And, Sean, I have to tell you, honestly, I have divided feelings right now about police because, when they're deployed against this rioting and looting that we're seeing from Intifa and BLM, I'm one of the back the blue guys, but when they're talking about violating your constitutional liberties, and I do quote people like policeman Greg Anderson, how a policeman should not enforce any unconstitutional law. I have divided feelings, but yes, our civil liberties are at risk. In fact, I look at the Bill of Rights there, and it's amazing how many statutes in the Bill of Rights are being flaunted now. For example, the right to peaceably assemble, freedom of worship. This past Easter was actually canceled for the most part around the world. And I think that's the first time that has actually happened since Constantine legalized Christianity in the 4th century AD. But another one that I think is significant is the cancellation of jury trials, because, a jury trial will violate social distancing, so we can't have them now. And right now, officially, that's temporary, but I'm afraid, Sean, that they're going to end up acclimating us to no jury trials. We'll get used to it, and they'll say, well, we have to skip jury trials due to COVID, and then we'll have politically appointed judges deciding someone's guilt or innocence instead of the traditional, very fair system of having 12 people who don't know you and don't know each other reaching a conclusion logically in a courtroom the way it should be done.
Let's talk about these masks and social distancing. It's so stupid, and anybody with common sense, anybody that can think logically knows this is nonsense. Because early on, Fauci was saying masks don't help, which is true.
Right.
Then he said, yes, we should all be wearing masks. Then they kind of locked things down, and so many stores and health clubs were shut. Nobody could go to their businesses, but Target and Walmart remained open. I saw a funny meme the other day that said, if masks worked, they'd be banned just like hydroxychloroquine. Okay, friends, that wraps it up for now. If you want to see the entire interview commercial-free, check us out at sgtreport.tv or become a patron. Thanks so much. God bless.
I want to know who gave the orders. I want to know, why the Air Force lied about the air drills that were going on that day, why the CIA lied to Congress. Why John Farmer, the 9/11 Commission report lawyer, said that there was a decision not to tell the American people the truth about 9/11.